Hello and welcome to Study History with Mr. P and my topic narrative about changes in the Vietnam conflict under President Nixon. So as President, Nixon promised to get the USA out of the war, but at the same time he did not want to leave if South Vietnam then became communist. He therefore, to start off with, worked on several approaches to the war in Vietnam. He firstly engaged in official peace talks. So 5 days after he became president, Nixon sent delegates to Paris to negotiate for peace with representatives from North and South Vietnam along with the Viet Cong. He also held additional secret peace talks when in August 1969 Henry Kissinger from the USA began secret talks with Lee Duc Tho of North Vietnam. These were secret because Nixon did not tell the South of these talks. There were also troop withdrawals. So in June 1969, Nixon lowered the maximum number of troops in Vietnam by 25,000 and began to withdraw troops on the 14th of July 1969. ARVN training also began, so the military in Vietnam were told to focus on training ARVN officers and troops. There was also secret bombing of Cambodia. On the 15th of March 1969, Nixon ordered the secret bombing of parts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that ran through Cambodia. Military orders and reports lied about the bombing raids. Nixon knew that expanding the war would be very unpopular. So all in all, on the 25th of July 1969, Nixon outlined what the role of the USA should be in Southeast Asian politics. This became known as the Nixon Doctrine, in which he said the USA would honour any treaty commitments it had made, help any ally against a nuclear threat, provide aid and training against non-nuclear threats, but not troops, and that the country under threats had to provide its own ground troops. So putting the Nixon Doctrine into practice, or the application of the Nixon Doctrine, was known as Vietnamization, and its key features were the following. US troops would be withdrawn from Vietnam but with honour, which meant not leaving the South at the mercy of the North and the Viet Cong. To ensure that the ARVN provided its own officers, for the USA to still provide training and equipment, and for South Vietnam to remain a separate country and not to become communist. Now, some people argue that this was a partial success in that it achieved its most basic aim of fewer US soldiers in Vietnam and fewer US deaths. But as I'm going to explain now, in many other ways, it was seen as a failure. So despite this aim of reducing US involvement in Vietnam, Nixon actually expands the war to start off with, firstly in Cambodia in 1970. So as I've already said, since 1969 the USA had been secretly bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Cambodia. Then in March 1970, a pro-American general, Lon Nol, took over in Cambodia and ordered the North Vietnamese to leave. The North Vietnamese then joined with Cambodian guerrillas and attacked Nol's government. Upon this happening, 50,000 ARVN troops and 30,000 US troops invaded Cambodia. During this time, significant damage was done to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. 11,000 communists were killed, bases and supply networks were destroyed, supplies and weapons were captured. But the communists just moved to deep inside Cambodia, and the North Vietnamese now sent supplies through sections of the trail that went through neighbouring Laos instead. There was also huge outcry when it was learned that US troops had gone into Cambodia, and as a result the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was cancelled. Remember, this was the resolution that gave the president essentially unlimited powers to do what he needed to with regard to Vietnam. We then move on to Laos in 1971. So North Vietnam had begun to use the Laotian Ho Chi Minh Trail more, so the US agreed to provide air support for an invasion of 21,000 ARVN troops. The North Vietnamese heard of the planned invasion and decided to fight a battle, attacking the city of Chepone that the ARVN had taken. This resulted in high casualties for the ARVN, who fled, leaving equipment and weapons behind. Then, in 1972, we have the Easter Offensive, which occurred on the 30th of March, when North Vietnam launched an attack with 120,000 troops in 3 places. Viet Cong and other guerrilla groups joined in. This was successful at first, but the North Vietnamese were eventually pushed back. and it also led later in the year to bombing of North Vietnam, when on the 6th of April 1972, the USA launched Operation Linebacker. There were no restrictions on targets, so Hanoi and Haiphong were bombed, mines were dropped in Haiphong harbour, and there were blockades to keep ships from the USSR and China from reaching North Vietnam. This actually almost wiped out North Vietnamese industry, disrupted supplies from the USSR and China. It destroyed radio stations and communist networks, and China and the USSR now began to urge North Vietnam to reach a peace settlement. So, despite the USSR and China now urging North Vietnam to reach a peace settlement, Vietnamization itself was seen as a failure for a number of reasons. Firstly, for the US troops themselves. They no longer saw themselves as trying to win, and therefore they openly avoided battles with the VC. There were cases of fragging where soldiers actually killed officers who tried to force them into action. So this increased, as did the use of drugs. The ARVN themselves were an issue. They had become more effective, but they still did not have enough soldiers, and desertion was common amongst the ARVN. Many officers were reluctant to lead their troops into battle. Corruption was common, and lots of military supplies were stolen and then sold on. Training and equipment were an issue too. So over time, the US restricted funding for equipment and the training of the ARVN. South Vietnamese officers were trained hurriedly and then rushed into battle. Many of them then could not read the instruction manuals for the equipment they received because the instructions were in English. The backdrop to this was also the economic and political problems in South Vietnam itself. So departure of US personnel led to an economic crisis in the south. The government in Saigon then fell because it was weak, both politically and militarily, and it was also unpopular and corrupt. So leaving Vietnam eventually happened. So from June 1972, the USA and North Vietnam were under increasing pressure to make peace, but the South felt left out of negotiations and refused to sign the peace agreement of October 1972. But on the 27th of January 1973, the Paris Agreement was signed, and it set up a ceasefire and a table for peaceful reunification. However, the South Vietnamese government refused to negotiate, and therefore in March 1975, the North Vietnamese army swept through South Vietnam. The USA now refused to give any more help, and Vietnam became a united communist country. So, all in all, you can see if Vietnam becomes united under a communist regime, from an American point of view, surely that would have meant Vietnamization was a failure. So I hope you've enjoyed this detailed topic narrative. Please look out for my next few videos, which look at how it was the war actually came to an end and why the USA failed in the war.